Welcome everyone to EED webinar number 2, the basics of reconciling brain, heart, and body. It is January 23rd, and we have Paul, Christine, Philippe, and Alina joining us, and some more people may join. So welcome everyone. Just you can wave hello or unmute to say hello. You all look so great, so happy.
Hello, nice to be here.
Yeah. Great. So, at any time, if you have questions, please, feel free to interrupt me to ask your questions. We'll address them as we go along. If a question is better answered later, I'll tell you that directly. I'll give you a little short answer, and then I can expand upon it later during the webinar. I do have a lot of information here to share with you, and I love to have discussion with you. We're a small group today, so we can really take time to have some discussion. And it looks to me like for everybody that's joining, you're all coaches. However, you may be are you doing some consulting and leadership as well? No. Okay.
So at the moment, I'm a self-employed coach for personal coaching, but I will start working again at a company, and there I will see how I can apply emergent essence dynamics to team coaching and potentially leadership.
Yeah.
Skills coaching.
That's great. I'm going to speak anyways. I always speak anyways about how this applies to several disciplines and professions. Because they all seem to relate to each other, as well as they have their specific focus and discipline. Welcome, Irena. Good to see you as well. Hello, welcome.
Sorry, I'm late. I have this flu terrible, and I was a little bit late.
Okay. Well, you're here. We've just started, so it's good to see you. Okay.
Good to see you too.
Great. Okay, so I'm going to show you what we're going to cover today. And then I will be expanding upon it. So I'm going to show you what we're talking about. And then if you have any thoughts or questions you want to add in just based on these few points, let me know. I'll mark them. So we're looking at the brain and the body connection, so that EED takes on a holistic view. And there are more and more holistic views coming out for leadership and coaching, therapies, etc. So one way to create a holistic approach is to treat the whole being of the person, meaning connect their brain and their body together rather than address one or the other. So we're looking at how do you create that alignment and connection between the brain and the body. Also, to create coherence, so that a person is not in dissonance with themselves, but full resonance and alignment. And when we talk about coherence, it's similar to congruency, but it's more like when all parts are linking up, especially when we talk brain-heart coherence, everything becomes synchronized. And what that can do is it starts opening our mind even more, where we can actually start accessing altered states of consciousness or states of super consciousness. So it actually alters the frequencies of our brain waves, where we can become more receptive or even more highly alert. So it changes our thinking patterns. I was talking about congruency. Now, what I mean by congruency now, the difference between coherence and congruency is, if coherency means where everything is synchronized and we can affect our brain frequency, for example. Congruency is more about what are we saying, what are we doing, what are we thinking, what are we feeling. So our actions, behaviors, feelings, and thoughts are also all lined up. Without congruency, we're not really going to get coherence, okay? And with congruency, I'll talk about this later, our brain is divided into sections, if you want to think about it very simplistically. And what we want to do is start unifying the hemispheres together, the left and the right brain, for example, so that we're having a whole brain experience rather than only using one side or another side of our brain. So we're going to talk about, well, what is that and how do you do it? And then connecting all of that together with how that promotes a person's well-being, which increases their resilience and their sense of autonomy, which then creates a natural liberation and transformation. So this is another way of speaking about how do you facilitate transformation in someone, and it is by working with the brain-body connection, coherence, congruency, and well-being. And when that all works together and they can enter these superconscious states, they have control over what they're transforming, and that aligns to their most innate inner self, their natural state of being, and it is not influenced by what they think they're supposed to be, which is outside influences. It's more of what they know to be within inner wisdom. And that's how they're creating the transformations for themselves. Or that's what's directing the transformation. So, with that said, well, how was that as an introductory spiel? And what are points of interest for you, or any particular questions already that you have regarding working with any of these points I've mentioned?
I have a question regarding the superconscious states. How can we get a picture of that if we are not in it? Or how can we actually get an idea of it?
I can describe it a little bit, and then hopefully I'll be able to give a demo during it. I don't talk too much.
That would be nice, yeah. But the next question would be something like, are you in a superconscious state? Are you switching these, or where do you use those?
The short answer is you're switching. Okay. The goal is to be able to consciously or at will start opening and closing these states, or going deeper or lighter in the states, for example, if we could say that. Right now you're in an alert state. By working with you, get you in a far more deeper trance-like, more receptive state, for example, almost like a dreaming state. So that, and what we can do is get you, when I'm saying super conscious, it's almost like you're in this dream-like receptive state, but also you're highly alert and active. So it seems like a paradox. Another way to describe superconscious state is that the entire brain is active and it is coherent with the rest of the body. Okay, so that you're accessing information from many, many, many places. All right.
So it sounds like a state in which we more effortless communicate and emphasize with our environment without actually pushing ourselves or trying to get somewhere.
Yeah, a flow state is a superconscious state. If you've ever experienced a creative flow, that's another example. Okay. For example, musicians or athletes are entering a superconscious state. Wow.
You pointed out as last, so I'm completely lost because I feel we start with the end now discussing. So
yeah.
I'm a bit lost to be honest.
That's okay. I'm going to come back to this, and this I do bring towards the end. So. What other questions do you have? Just initial questions. And then I'll walk you guys through this. Or curiosities. One question I could ask is, in your current work, how are you doing with working with thoughts, feelings, and physicality with clients?
We have a background noise again.
Are there any struggles that you have, or particular questions around how to work with those areas? Because normally I get tons of questions around that, but that's okay. Oh, sorry, I'll go ahead.
I'm more like curious about, like, I want to know more. Maybe then I can point my questions more to the point. So
Okay.
it's not so generic. I have
Yep.
a lot of thoughts in my job at the moment, but I don't know how they fit into your topic. So that's
Well, if you have scenarios from client situations or from your job or life, those are very relevant, because then I can link theory to practice. Okay. And by the way, in these webinars, I present more of a sort of a general theory and concept and philosophy, and then I can demonstrate some things, but I can't break everything down into, you specifically do this and do this and do this. I'll share as much as I can with you guys, but in 90 minutes, I can't teach you all the details. That's what the whole EED programs are all about, okay? So I'm giving you sort of an introduction to these things. Okay. Let's look at what I got next here. Okay, so very briefly, I'm going to tell you what is EED. EED is a way of restoring a person's well-being, enhancing their resilience, and connecting them with their own sense of autonomy. And autonomy means they have power over themselves, as opposed to being influenced by the outside world or outside people, telling them what to think, do, or be. This is where they find their own autonomy. So this is power over self. This gives them the ability to think critically, to not be as reactive and triggered all the time, and it gets them more in a fluid state of relationship with everything around them. So when we're in a naturally resilient and autonomous state, we naturally have well-being. And there, again, is where I'm stressing, that's where the transformations come from. Many times when we practice leadership or mediation, conflict resolution, or coaching, we're in such a rush to transform things with concern for the person's well-being, but we don't have them connected to their resilience and well-being or autonomy. And if we rush those transformations, they're not going to last, or they can quickly fall apart. I can explain reasons for that later. But we may be aggravating the inner resistance the person is feeling anyways. We may be creating more disconnection than connection, because they are not connected with this inside source of wisdom and direction. They're more dependent than on, okay, what do you think? What do you think? What should I do? And so, so what EED does is it gives you very specific techniques and structures to go to well-being, resilience, and autonomy first, and then see what natural transformations arise. Then you have the techniques to lock those transformations in place, okay? And so the main way we're working here is through patterns and dynamics, meaning everyone has, they behave according to patterns. They're conditioned. They have a social programming. They have a personal programming. And so what EED does is it looks at, one, how are we in relationship to things, as opposed to what are you telling me? And I'll explain the difference between that a little bit later. We're looking at how are they acting and behaving, because that reveals patterns, behavioral patterns. Then once we can capture the patterns, then we can start shifting the patterns and rebuilding them from the ground up, meaning first from resilience and well-being and source, and then the patterns will start to shift around to reflect that resilience. And then again, they'll start behaving and acting and feeling differently because of the patterns that are changing. And why I'm saying it's fractal is, fractal means a repeating pattern that's working on both the large and the small scale. It's like the same pattern at work, all right? So the little choices I make and the big choices I make are related because of my process of choosing, okay? And that's where the fractal lives, right? So that's just an example. So what happens in small ways happens in big ways, okay? Think of it that way. And finally, what we're doing then is we're reconciling our ego with our essence. Another way to say that is we're not trying to eliminate ego. We're not trying to eliminate identity or personality. What we're doing is we're getting the person in touch with their more innate self. You could call it their true self, their inner wisdom, their higher self, and creating the bridge between that autonomous wisdom and knowledge and bridging that to the identity or the personality, so that when they're acting out in the world, they're not seeking to fulfill the ego, but rather they're using the ego as a vehicle to create from essence, right? There's a difference. They're not trying to fill themselves up with a temporary or false fulfillment, but because they're connected to their source wisdom, there's already a sense of fulfillment. Now they can create from there, and their personality allows them to act and interact in a more healthy way. How does this apply? This applies to coaching, leadership, mediation, meaning conflict resolution, also to the healing arts. It also applies to therapies and much, much more, including even, how to do business and sales and client relations. Because it's a whole different approach on how to be in relationship with things, and a whole different approach on how to access and apply self-awareness. And it all, again, relates back to well-being. Create well-being first and then transformation. Any questions or comments on this? You're all good? Just give me a thumbs up or whatever. Yeah, okay. Good. Okay. So, I have a question for you. In all of these industries, leadership, coaching, etc., the word authenticity, and in business, the word authenticity gets thrown around a lot. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on what does this mean, be authentic or authenticity.
I can start.
Yeah.
Many people think authenticity is be yourself, but it depends the level of consciousness. It's different what they means.
Right.
In my way, it's more about what you talk about, the reconciliation between ego and essence. This is, to me, my personal way to share authenticity.
Okay. So you're saying authenticity comes more from source and how it's emanating from source through our personality identity.
Yes, yes.
Okay, great. Any other thoughts on what is authentic? What does that mean? Be authentic. Be yourself, as you said. That's some ways how it's interpreted.
If it just comes natural, if you are like you are, you don't think I have to be like that. If you like put aside your roles and I think it's it comes from the heart, not from the brain, more or less.
Okay, coming from the heart, less from the brain, or what you think. Philippe, you had something to add in there?
Well, it was just a bit, actually a combination of two things we just heard. There's, I would say there's two levels of authenticity. So the authenticity inside, because you may have, am I being honest to myself about how I feel and what I desire in the situation? Okay. And the other level is, am I being honest and expressing myself in a congruent way with what I'm feeling and what I'm thinking inside to others. Okay. And in this case, when you're expressing yourself to others, it doesn't mean that you have to be well, if you're lost, or if you're if you have one way of thinking at one point in time and another way of thinking even the next day, then it's also an honest way. It's also honesty and authenticity to say that too to others.
Okay. So you're bringing in, there's when being authentic, we're being truthful.
Yes.
Basically, so truthful to ourselves, and then truthful to others. Now, so there's a problem with that, though. How does an actor give a convincing performance if they're playing a bank robber, but they're not a bank robber in their real life, but they're convincing as a bank robber? Do you understand? So, so the question is, are they being authentic? Are they being truthful? Are they being congruent? Are they, so, like, what really then is authentic? So, and this is where we run into some problems, where I know we say a lot, hey, be authentic with me, but what do we really mean, right? Because it can create a few problems. Maybe the person is being authentic, but not according to how you think they should be behaving. So, or maybe they think they're being authentic and they don't realize that inside their thoughts and feelings and etc. aren't lining up, right? They might think they're telling you the truth, but showing you something else. So with EED, we're redefining and expanding the word authenticity. And in fact, I'm just not using it. So, because it has so many assumptions with it. Now, so authentic means according to source. That's what it means, original, according to origin and source. So this is, when something is authentic, it's the original. An authentic painting is the original. An authentic style of performance means it's according to the period when the piece was originally performed. When you watch Baroque music with a Baroque ensemble playing authentic instruments, they're not playing modern day violins and cellos, okay? They're playing instruments actually from that time, and they sound different, right? So an authentic interpretation of of music or of a performance or something is, according to the source, the writer, the composer, okay? Respecting everything stylistically. So this is where I'm coming from when I'm saying authentic. So in order for me to be authentic, I must get to know my source and connect to my source, all right? So that means I've got to get in touch with essence, all right? And then things flow from essence in a congruent fashion, meaning there are no distortions or disconnections. There is a pure flow of connection from essence outward. And then from that way, if I'm connecting with source, I'm accessing truth. And I'll explain how we have an expanded view of truth as well. And then I can act truthfully, live truthfully, interact truthfully. Now, someone could still say I'm being inauthentic, even though I'm doing that, because people may have a preconception of what authenticity is supposed to look like. So this is also why I avoid using the word be authentic, because usually it's taken as something conceptual. It's a thought. Oh, when you're authentic, you're more vulnerable. When you're authentic, you show all your emotions and you're transparent. When you're authentic, you cry. So, I mean, like, there's many things like that getting thrown around. Agree or disagree in what I'm saying here?
Agree, and I'll add that sometimes you would say somebody's not being authentic because simply you were expecting another reaction from them. That's
also true, right? Another expression like that is, you're acting out of character. You're behaving differently than I know, so I might think you're not being authentic. Because again, it's according to my perception of you, okay? So that's another layer of how we can distort what it is to be authentic. So what we're working on here then, the first place we go is we need to have our awareness, either as a leader or a coach or a consultant, or even for self-awareness of what am I thinking? What's going on the mental level? What's going on the feeling or the emotional level? And then what's going on physically? And when we say physically, that means what's my posture? What are my actions? What are my gestures? All right. What am I saying? What are my words? That's everything that's physically expressed. Does it match with the feeling? And does it match with the thought? Okay. Now, those are the first three tangible levels we can work with. When that lines up, then that opens up an extra level, which we can call essence. This is your source, wisdom, higher intelligence, expanded awareness, okay? When we have congruency of thought, emotion, and physicality, then we can start opening into expanded intelligence and expanded states of being or consciousness, okay? So in a way, you could think of it that then that's when we can start to channel in higher wisdom or intelligence, and that can show up like intuition, for example, okay? And intuition can enter into our thoughts, our emotions, or our body, or all three at the same time. It just depends whatever we're focused on or paying attention to, okay? Any questions so far on this? Okay, so if you want to access more intuition, then first get centered in your thoughts, feelings, and physicality so that they start to converge and line up, all right? So if you're saying, okay, physically I'm in a meditative posture, I'm feeling stressed, and I'm thinking about what I'm supposed to be doing, tonight, because I'm worried that I might be late for my appointment, I'm really not going to be accessing a lot of anything from that because I'm not in a congruent state of being. I look like I'm meditating, but my mind's somewhere else, and my body is not matching the meditative state because it's more in stress. Is this making sense to you guys? Okay. So how do we get somebody congruent, especially for coaching or leading? You have three places to look. What are they thinking? What are they feeling? What are they doing? Pick one and start to line the others up to it. And that already will release resistance or calm resistance down, and it gets the client focused, okay? And from that focus, then we can start opening up higher awareness, and we can start having them focus on well-being, okay? So this is a basic thing we're always doing, is lining everything up. And this is the way we can connect them to essence, is by lining up body, emotion, and thoughts. Okay? How are we doing with this? Okay? Sounds pretty basic, okay. So there's another form of congruency. Which is, now this may not be very apparent to a lot of people. If you were on the last webinar, we talked about story, game, and source. These are three levels of truth, okay? So, and this is what we're working with a lot in EED, is we want to get these aligned as well. So when I'm telling you my story, I'm actually giving you my piece of the truth. It's a singular truth. Here's what I experienced in my life, okay? For example, if I said, well, let me tell you about this argument I had with my friend. You're only getting my side of the truth. This is my point of view, okay? And I use this story to defend myself, to promote myself, to project my beliefs and thoughts so that you can know me, my personality. And my story, to me, is true because it's through my point of view, okay? But if you get my friend and I in the same room, we will have two different truths. because we're both coming from a singular truth. And when we look on the relationship level, now we're looking more at truth in opposition. How do those truths oppose each other? This is where they'll agree or disagree. There's consensus or non-consensus, okay? So, you know, you can get a crowd of people watching an event on the street, and they'll all state different facts because they're all stating it from different points of view. And they'll collectively, you'll get a bigger, wider picture of what may have happened, but individually, they will have seen a completely different event, one from the other sometimes, okay? So this is what we call the game level. This is the relationship dynamics, what's happening between, okay? And we're looking at how there is resonance and resistance between the two people, okay? And this is where people act upon each other, act and react, act and behave. And that's telling a deeper level of truth, which might not match with their story. And then the level below that is what's going on universally underneath this. This is where, at essence, those opposing truths can be reconciled or unified. It's where we can find truth in paradox, so to speak. This is where we can have many multiple truths available.
Sorry, can you repeat it? Truth in what?
Truth, this is like a reconciled truth, where we can have opposites and paradox where they actually can fit together. It's a level of multiple truths, more like a quantum reality, okay? So it's where like everything and anything and nothing is possible at the same time. So just think of this as being multiple truths, multiple pathways, right? And what happens is when we drop down into source, that's what this diagram is showing. So when we drop down into source, anything can now be true, and it's all true. Then I can choose a truth, bring it into my relationship, and then bring it into my point of view. So that now I'm living a more coherent truth that reflects the way I'm in relationship and my connection to essence. There can be incongruencies between what I'm saying, what I'm doing in relationship, and have a disconnect to my own essence. So I could be living 3 different levels of truths that don't even match up. How are you guys doing with this? Because this might be a little bit more foreign to understand. Or what are you understanding from this? Any comments, questions?
What I don't understand, how do you know that it doesn't line up?
It's, again, if you're working with story and game, what I'm telling you is not what I'm doing to you. So, quick example is, oh no, Christine, I'm not annoyed with you at all. I'm not annoyed with your question. Congruency between what I'm saying and what I'm doing. Okay? So I'm saying everything is okay, but I'm projecting some anger. I might be projecting blame. Okay, so what I'm really doing is I'm telling you, well, yes, I'm very annoyed with what you're saying.
When you explain it, I thought you mean like for my story, I bring in, let's say, an opposite point of view, which I integrate in my story. But I don't know whether people do that. No,
well, they do. This.
But then
we'll discuss this more in the next webinar, and the webinar after is come in with conflicting stories. So I'm trying to simplify it, and it can get very rich, okay? So, for example, this person on the left, they have one point of view, one story, and the way they perceive everything around them is according to their story. They're not really connecting to that other person, okay? They're using the other person to support or their story in some way. Meaning either by this person can agree or disagree. This person is either a problem or a friend, right? That but it all supports this little reality of my beliefs here. Okay? What EED does is it goes on to the next level and it says, what's really going on between here? Because we'll get an expanded truth and we can start reconciling opposition. So then this can start opening this person's perception to start accepting other truths than their own, and then and start being in relationship with things more truthfully. Once they can do that, then they can enter a zone where anything can be true and they're non-threatened, because now they're not sealed in with a personality or an identity.
May I have another question?
Sure.
Like what you're saying, like let's say the left person. So as a coach, you work with the left person.
Yes.
How and what you show is that the left and the right, so both perspectives are brought in. But this would mean they need to have a whatever conversation or an exchange of their point of view.
Yeah. So I'll put. Okay, now let's apply this directly to coaching. So this is your client on the left. This is their topic on the right. That can be a person or an event. Doesn't matter. They're in relationship to it. In the coaching conversation, if you only pay attention to their story, this is what you're coaching. The beliefs and ideas and feelings towards that topic. You don't know, you're not hearing the real topic because one, it's not in the room, but two, if you're not opening this person's bubble, you're only going to be reinforcing what they believe, and this is where they get resistance to change. If you try to change their perspective and it doesn't agree with this sealed, closed reality, they're going to reject it because they're unable to switch, to open the point of view. We need to drop them down into a more expanded sense where they can start allowing themselves to be affected by the topic and allowing the topic to influence them. Okay? Then they get in a more unity with it. Then they're going to discover more truth and at the same time more humility. Oh, here's maybe where I'm going wrong. Oh, here's maybe where I'm misunderstanding things. Okay? They'll start to stop clinging to their belief system and values that got cemented into place on this level. Okay? Then when they're more in this state, and this is exactly what EED does. EED, the first thing it does is opens the bubble. Now they'll be able to switch perspectives, and then they can start to take on those new beliefs. Okay? Does that make sense to you now, Christine?
Yeah, but without being in touch with this other person or topic.
Exactly.
Or so. Okay.
Exactly. To move from this story level into the game level, they have to let go of some attachments. Then when they move down into source level, and this is where we can program things at the root level. This is where we can lock in, anchor, and sustain new belief systems. This is where they have absolutely no attachments. They're in such a fluid, receptive state. This is where we're talking about getting into a super conscious place. Okay? Full autonomy. They have a direct experience of being absolutely complete and whole. A direct experience, not an idea of being complete and whole. It's a reality. Then we can rebuild them into how are they in relationship with their topic. What's their new reality they live in with themselves? The EED plays with these three levels. And when there's a flow between these three levels, now you have an expanded sense of authenticity because you have expanded truth and an expanded sense of what it really is to be congruent. Not just congruent with itself, but with relationships and that source. So that's a lot of information. And then you're like, oh my God, how do I do that? Well, we have techniques for it. Any other comments, questions here? Nope. Okay. So, so how do we do this? Well, this is partly what the EED model is. This is not the complete model here. It's just showing you a portion of it. But this is what we're doing all the time in our interactions as practitioner to client And this is what you can even do at all times, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, out in your life. In the way you interact is, first, we're acting and responding. It's a constant action and interaction. That creates rhythm and flow, and we're working off behaviors and energies of people. In order to get them to act and to feel, they have to have things to react from. And we use ourselves to act upon the other person. Acting upon them can mean you articulate what's going on. Oh, I notice you look angry. But you want to elicit their response. What are you feeling? Or if you're doing mediation, you want the people acting and reacting to each other. What you want is this cause and effect. That gets us off them spinning out in their story and gets them more aware of what's going on in their game, okay? Where we're focusing on in this webinar is the focus loop, where we work with balancing awareness with experience. This creates alignment and congruency, okay? So what is awareness? What are your ideas of what we mean by awareness?
Today I drank a tea, and on these little paper buttons there was a saying, don't be aware, don't be emotional. And I really like that because I never thought about it. So, I mean, maybe awareness is just noticing, to be aware. I mean, whatever is going on, like somewhere outside and somewhere inside. But I really like that because it's not judging. Awareness is without like a plus or a minus in it.
That's right. Another way to think of this is awareness is able to be more objective. It's not so attached.
Yeah.
Okay? Yeah. It does have an ability to open. Awareness is, what am I thinking? What am I noticing? Okay? Then it can include what's the higher wisdom, or what is some intuition. We can include higher levels of awareness to it. Okay? So yes, there's a difference between thinking and feeling. Experience, the emotions belong more on the experience level. So this is going to be more subjective. How am I affected emotionally? How am I affected physically? Okay? So this is working with body sensations. This is working with energy levels. This is working with emotions and physicality, when we talk about experience. If you want to talk energy with awareness, we're thinking more frequency levels, state of awareness. Higher frequencies, lower frequencies, okay? Higher thinking, lower thinking. Any questions there?
Can we have several awarenesses of the same experience?
Yes, of course, yeah.
At the same time?
What's your answer for that?
Yes, of course. I mean, I might be aware of several things at the same time of the same experience, or with the same person I'm in a room with. We have the same experience of being in the room, but still having different awarenesses.
Okay,
So,
if you're having an expanded awareness, you may be aware of a lot more information coming in at once. If you're in more of a narrow awareness, more, let's say, in the bubble, in the story, you're going to be only aware of one thing at a time, but you might quickly toggle from this to the next, to this to the next, and it might appear like you are aware of many things at once. So one thing about superconscious states is you're more at the level of source or essence, where it's more timeless. So you're bringing in a lot more information at the same time, and you're able to hold paradox, which means like two things at once. When you're not in that kind of a source awareness, you're going to be toggling. This is a very nitpicky response to what you're saying. So I'm saying yes and no to what you've said there.
For example, I was meeting two people the other day at a bar, and they were old friends, and they were very, very different to each other. One was always acting from an emotional place and saying, "Ah, be relaxed and life is cool and fine." The other person was very head-centered and always trying to explain everything and saying, "Yeah, but we need to have a common understanding." So they were very different, and they were arguing the whole evening.
Yeah.
And they never seemed to get a common understanding. But for me, watching them, I felt I could understand both of them and myself in that situation. So this is what I understand when you talk about different awarenesses, like being like one or
well,
like,
one person's coming more from experience and one person's coming more from awareness, and then that's creating a bit of a conflict. And that can happen. And as a coach or a leader, you need to be aware. Some people are more oriented towards awareness, where they have very logical, conceptual, philosophical answers to questions or the way they perceive themselves. And then you have others that communicate through feeling and sensation and movement, and they're more experience-oriented, right? And so this is how they experience themselves. What we're doing here is creating an equal balance. For every experience, there is an awareness. For every awareness, there is an
we have again a background noise. Maybe, Christina, can you?
Okay. So I will say that again. For every experience, there is an awareness. For every awareness, there is an experience. And when we start linking the two together, what happens is the person starts aligning. So this is how you balance out people who are more oriented towards awareness or experience. Is that clear for you guys? And so we design our questions and our focus with the client around this loop. This is what's creating not only our focus as a practitioner, but the person's focus, okay? And very quickly, by balancing your focus between awareness and experience, they balance theirs. And they start opening a greater channel. And then they can start accessing higher wisdom and more essential experience. Are you guys okay with that? Great. Okay. So let's work with the brain here for a second. Let's talk about the brain. Let's imagine that's a brain, okay? So normally, our brain is segmented, okay? You guys have heard lots about this. We have left and right hemisphere of the brain, okay? And the left side of the brain is our logical thinking. It categorizes, it creates data information, okay? It looks at details, okay? Logical sequences, A, B, C, 1, 2, 3, and everything follows. That's our left side, okay? Now, our right side is more holistic. It sees the interconnections between things. It connects, it's able to connect all those dots together. So, for example, you have pixels on your screen. The left brain picks up all the individual pixels. The right brain can now start putting that together into an image that you can recognize as a whole. You recognize a whole image as opposed to just individual dots. That's a simplistic way of describing the right brain. Also with right brain, because it is more holistic, it's able to be non-logical, non-linear, all right? So it thinks more through images and pictures and whole concepts, all right? And this is what allows us to be creative or poetic, because we can jump these logical leaps. We don't need A, B, C, 1, 2, 3. I can go from A to 3 to C to 1 back to B. It doesn't depend on order, okay? So this is where we attribute creativity, is in the right brain. It's able to creatively rearrange things, all right? And the left brain creates order, okay? Order, logic, and sequence. How are you guys doing with that? That's good? Okay. So another thing to think about. What we're doing is we're balancing, partly why we'll go awareness experiences, we can start balancing left and right, okay? Because as we make a link between awareness and experience, sometimes what we get from the body does not seem logical to the brain, but still feels true. And so we start blending the two together, but also it allows us to keep switching. So we don't have to always ask logical linear questions if we're paying attention to story too much. So then we need to ask more creative questions, more inspiring questions, okay? How are you guys doing with that information?
Sorry, I didn't get it. When do we ask more creative questions? When what is?
We want a balance between logical and creative questions, because then we start exercising both sides of the brain.
Okay.
People in general are taught to really just use the left side, and the right side is not favored so much anymore. Okay, so if you want to work body and brain together, my left hand corresponds to my right brain. It's cross-wired. And the right hand corresponds to the left brain. So for a right-handed person, they're going to naturally be oriented towards their logic. They can easily access it. A left-handed person can more easily access the right brain and creativity, for example. So, for example, it's not a rule, but many artists and creative people are left-handed. And many people should be left-handed, but they weren't allowed to be left-handed in school. They were always told you have to be right-handed. That's hopefully stopping, but if you want the client to even switch sides of the brain, have them focus on a different part of their body. If you want them to get creative, have them gesturing with their left hand, not their right. It might feel strange, but if they start exercising this hand or that left side of their body, they may start having different, more intuitive, creative ideas, okay? They can escape their logic, okay? That's one way as a tip, okay? Now, also what's going on is we have a front and a back to our brain. We have our frontal lobe, and then we have the reptilian brain, okay? So in the back of our brain, this is our fear and emotion. You could call it a fear center and an emotional center. I'm being very simplistic here, okay? I'm not claiming to be a neuroscientist, okay? But in our reptilian brain, we have basic survival skills. These are attached much more to emotions, the lower emotions like fear and anger, because it makes us move to survive. We either run away or we fight, right? Fight or flight. There are actually 4 behaviors that we speak about. I'll talk about those at more length in another webinar, and we learn it especially in Module 2, where we fight, we flee, we search or escape, and we cling to things. But these are all reactive behaviors. So the back of the brain is reactivity. What it's really doing when this gets flooded, the front shuts down, and we're really just surviving, okay? The front brain is more where we feel lucid, conscious, aware. We can be more detached, so we can think things through. This is where we can be more discerning, have more critical thinking. Now, what you could say is perhaps this is a slower part of the brain, because the back of the brain is instantly reactive, right? But if we're only driven by the back of our brain, then again, that's going to reinforce that story bubble, okay? If we start calming down the back of the brain and move towards the front, we're going to get more lucidity and less attachment, okay? And we can start opening that bubble, okay? So that requires that we're in more a state of calm in order to activate the front brain. If we're under threat, we're going to use the back of the brain. This is also why we're stressing go to resilience first. Because if the client is trying to make changes, they're most likely going to try to be logical about it, favoring the left side of the brain, and they're going to be under fear, anxiety, and stress, so they're just going to be reactive. to everything they're trying to change. And there's really no opening. Then there's no creativity and there's no lucidity. So what we want to do in EED is balance the left and the right. That's what the awareness experience loop does. And balance front to back, where we neutralize resistance and promote resilience in the client. And this is what's going to get front and back working together in more unison. How are you guys doing with this information? Yeah, any questions or comments?
Only wording question, understanding we said in the front there is lucidity, or what is lucidity?
Yeah, there's more conscious awareness, more awareness of self, let's say, more self-awareness, which can mean I have more power and control over myself. I can reason, I can discipline myself, I can be more discerning. I'm lucid, okay? When we are coming from the back of the brain, we're coming from a very fundamental programming, and we're almost coming from a trance-like state. It's like the awareness shuts down and we just go and we act. If you've ever gotten so angry, right, and you can even see yourself doing things like, oh my God, I never do this. I never say these words, but they're just coming. That's when the back of the brain is overly triggered, right, overactive. The front has shut down, okay? The body is designed to do that for us to be able to operate in an emergency. But if we're constantly stressing ourselves out and not connected to resilience, we're going to be constantly acting like we're in a state of emergency, constantly reactive, okay? So we need to not only counterbalance left and right, but we need to build up our access to the front of the brain and start reconciling it with the back, okay? Because we need our reptilian behaviors, okay, to survive out in the world, but they don't have to be overactivated. We can still be lucid, okay? How are you guys doing with that?
I think that is very valuable information, as the reptilian brain is overflooded a lot in our times nowadays. There are so many stress factors and so many things that it's really essential to balance it out, or to activate more the resilient side. Like, you can see it in many small details. That's like, right. Okay, I want to have different passwords for different accounts because it's more secure, but it's stressing, you know. But yeah, but it's very makes a lot of sense to overcome the stress and to get resilient in that.
Yeah. So this is where awareness and experience help, because the back of the brain is very connected to emergency emotions, okay? Stress, anxiety, fear, anger, all right? And sex, okay? It's less connected at all to anything like the joy or the sadness, these I'll call them upper body emotions. So it's very primal. In fact, the violent sex center and the violent center are right next to each other back here. And they can cross wire when they become overflooded. So if somebody's experiencing stress, you can get them into the awareness and just say, okay, take a step back. Let's look at this logically. Let's be lucid about this, right? That can help calm down the emotions and the reptilian brain, okay? Add in a connection to well-being and resilience, and they're right back in the front, and they're less under threat, okay? So I'll give you more of a complete picture here. Working with emotions. So we're bridging into the emotions now. So what do you believe are the function of emotions? What are emotions there for? What are they here for? Why have emotions? Because I know some people would just love to take the emotions out of it. I hear, you know, many coaches in training and others saying, well, I don't like to ask that question, how do you feel? It could be dangerous, it could be reckless. Or they've got others that are addicted to the question and say, you have to work with the feelings. And they kind of ignore working with the mind. So we need to look at what are the functions of emotions?
I would say that the primary function of emotions is to feel how the situation you're in feels with what you aspire to.
Okay.
So how congruent is the outside situation with my inner desires?
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Other thoughts?
Yes, mine is similar with Philippe, and it's energy, emotional information around what's going on within us, and how they can be used in how can we respond to the situation.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Irene is speaking closer to the actual function of the emotion, and Philippe, you're speaking to also partly the function of emotion, but it's getting collapsed with a little bit of awareness and body sensing. So the word feeling is very broad, and we need to start separating what's my emotion, what's my energy, what am I sensing, okay? And what is the sensation, okay? There's a difference between all of these, okay? So let's look first at the function. So one, energy in motion, it's meant to drive action. If you are really excited to do something, you are motivated, you will do it, okay? If you say, I don't really care, you're not gonna get the thing done that you need to do. So this is also why the reptilian brain is tied to those lower emotional centers. Through it responds to fear and anger and sex, because those are very, very, very strong drivers, okay? They drive us into action, okay? Now, the other thing emotions will do is they will anchor programming. This can mean belief systems and patterns and behaviors, okay? So when you're learning something, if you're learning something under high stress, okay, you may not necessarily learn the information, but what you're actually learning are your stress behaviors, okay? If you're learning in a more relaxed, calm, pleasurable environment, you'll be able to learn your information along with, well, you'll be learning a pleasurable pattern at the same time, and I'm collapsing these two together, anchoring, programming, and storing information. But I'll talk with the programming. I'm going to talk trauma, for example. This is going to be better. When you are traumatized, you are with a lot of emotions, but you also become very receptive. And the way you may have fought your way out of that trauma, or the way you experienced the victimization, those emotions lock in that patterning system that you learned, okay? So that when it's triggered again, those patterns come back on automatic. You don't have to be conscious of it, okay? And it got anchored in through the strong emotion. So for any time we're programming ourselves to think differently and act differently, we want a matching pleasurable emotion to anchor those new thoughts. That helps these new neural pathways fire up more consistently and faster and deeper. Okay, when we're programming, we want repetition, we want high emotion, and we want a little bit of variation so we can keep reconstructing the pathway. So emotions are key to cementing in a new neural pathway. If there's no emotion to it, they'll link up, but very weakly. It'll be very weak. Okay? Emotion cements those neural pathways together better. And the third thing, when I spoke about trauma, you've got, it's storing information. So this is learning information, okay? When you're learning in a pleasurable environment, and then you can access that environment again, everything you learned in that information will also get released. Okay, when you've had a very angry moment, you've got also all the thoughts and beliefs going with that anger, getting hardwired with that anger. So anger can release patterns and information. And when we're talking traumas, the memory itself gets stored with the emotion. So when that trigger comes back, the emotions can come back along with the memory, okay, when we're recovering memories, okay? So emotions are like the glue. They'll glue in programming, patterns, beliefs, and information, learning and memory. And they push us along. They drive us, okay? So it's all about movement. How are you guys doing with that information? Does that make sense? Logical sense? Great. So knowing this, then we can be more, if we know the function of emotions, then we can know how to work with them and when not to work with them, okay? So when we're working with emotion, if we want to anchor something, we need to include emotions. And if we want to anchor resilience, we want to anchor the pleasurable emotions, okay, that connect back to somebody's well-being. If we want to program a healthy behavior, then we want to program it with a sense of well-being, resilience, positivity, okay? If we're programming a new behavior and they start doubting it and fearing it and getting anxiety and getting upset and we keep pushing, we're going to also program the stress and anxiety in the new behavior. So we don't want to be programming accidentally stress, fear, anger, and emotions in a new habit or a new behavior. This is why you can't pressure yourself to diet. You can't pressure yourself to quit smoking or quit drinking, because you're not relieving yourself of the fear and the anxiety, and all you're doing is you're triggering the need to do those habits which were started in the first place because it came from something of a disconnect, right? It's meant to relieve my stress and anxiety. That's why I'm eating. That's why I'm drinking. That's why I'm smoking. Do you guys understand what I mean? Okay, so you can't, if you're here to anchor something, know what you're anchoring. Be very rigorous with the client of what emotions are involved when you're doing an anchoring process or when you're doing a programming process. So if you've invited the client into a new perspective, you want to discover what are all the emotions that benefit the well-being of the person, tie that in with their beliefs, and get them in that high sense of pleasure and well-being and high emotion to anchor the new perspective. And that will program new beliefs, okay? How are you guys doing with that? Okay. Now, the other things we can do with emotions is we want to release them in order to deprogram beliefs. So this is where it's fine to release anger, release sadness, okay? Because that can start then releasing the program. They can start detaching from the old program that anger and sadness was holding in. Is this making sense? Now, when we are doing a release process or a deprogramming process, we cannot engage with the story. Remember, emotions store information and programming. Well, guess what the story contains? Information and programming. So if we're asking our client, okay, so how was your bad day at work? You said you had a bad day. Tell me about it. They'll start saying, wow, and I was fighting with him, and then this thing happened, and I got so angry. If they're engaging the story with the emotion, all they're doing is reinforcing the badness of the bad day. Do you understand? If you want them to release the emotion, then just focus. You can get it started. So bad day is the trigger, and then, oh, he got me so angry. We want to isolate the story from the experience and just say, so What are the sensations of the anger? We're not focused now on the guy that ticked you off. We're now just focused on what's happening in your body, okay? And then they can vent out the emotion. Or the other way is, don't tell me about the bad day, but just write it out. If they write it out, they're not talking it through and they're not feeling the emotion with the story. Okay, that's another way. So for example, if someone's had a traumatic experience, they're better to write it out by themselves, like a flow writing, just whatever fragments come through, rather than tell you about the experience, because they're re-traumatizing themselves if they're emotionally telling the experience. How are you guys doing with this information?
But we agree that when they write it out, as you say, they're still reliving it with less investments than when they're telling you the whole story and trying to get you in the story. But they're still reliving it to a certain extent. We agree about that, right?
Are you talking about? I didn't get the context of your question.
Oh, sorry. So you said the client, it's better for the client to write out the story rather than to tell you the story. But we agree that they are still reliving the story emotionally and again re-imprinting the story.
Yes.
When they're writing it out, even if it's less than if they are telling you the story, right?
Okay, and you're still confusing me with this question, but
okay.
Because I'm hearing a few things all mixed in together, so I want to separate it out. Okay.
Sure.
All I'm doing is I'm saying, now none of you will be working with trauma, okay? But I'm using trauma as an example, all right? For example, a memory surfaces and they realize, oh, I was abused or whatever, and it was a highly traumatic experience. At that moment, it's better for them to not talk to you about it, but to say, okay, the memory is there, here's a piece of paper, write it out. Once they've written it out, it disengages their emotional attachment with the memory, and they can have some distance, and they start to actually write it out more logically or illogically, but it's fragments. Then later they can look at it and start to make some logical sense out of it rather than feel through the victimization of it, okay? Because if they feel through the victimization, they're locking in the victim pattern and they're re-traumatizing and reprogramming themselves. So
it's more, so if I understand correctly, the use of the technique is more centered on the fact to create distance to the story and to have a more distant perspective to the story, right?
Distance to the emotion.
Yes, sorry, yes.
Okay, so, and yes, distance to the story so that it can be more objective, you know? And and we do some of this work in EED, but we do it differently than what I'm saying. I don't ask people to necessarily write it out. I stop the story, I get them in a resilient place first and drop them there. Then they can put it up on a screen and they can watch it from resilience. That's another way, okay, is to re-watch it, not watch it objectively from resilience, okay? If they re-experience it, they're just, and you know, like, this is why I don't like this question, let's go back to the past, let's go re-experience that memory. You know, you don't know what you're going to come up with at that point, okay? If you're trying to deprogram somebody or trying to release a belief. So when we want to release a belief, for example, they could say, I've had a bad day, I'm really angry. Great, let's stop the story of it and go punch a pillow for a bit so you can vent the anger out, right? Now what are you experiencing? A little bit more clear space, clarity. We can drop into that as resilience. Now we can put out the day on a screen in front of you and let's logically work it through so that they're not, you know, the emotion has had some separation from the story. So Does that make sense to you guys? Okay.
A lot of sense.
Say it again, Irina.
A lot of sense, because I experienced the releasing of my own trauma, and I am one of the helping people to release trauma. Sometimes I can't say how it happened that I help people, because I work from the complete open space.
Yeah.
And I don't mind if I remember or not. The most important is that they release.
Yeah. Yes. Now, there's one other thing we do in EED, and this is sometimes I want to discover the programming. I won't do this if the person has been traumatized, but the bad day at work, great. Tell me a little bit about that bad day. I want them to get a little angry with it. I don't want them to start talking out the feelings with me. I just want them to connect with the anger, and I'm watching their behavior. Then I'll go bit by bit and say, aha, I noticed when you said this, you made this with your fist. When I said this back to you, this is how you reacted. So we start doing the cause and effect of the act and react, right? And we want them to engage the feeling while they act and react. But I'll still sometimes stop the story, and I just want them behaving. That way I can discover programming. So I do want them emotionally invested in what they're doing. But then when I want to start deprogramming that, I don't want that investment so much anymore. I want resilience instead, okay? So deprogram and release from resilience is very, very key. Resilience, meaning I feel my innate self, I cannot be destroyed, I'm permanent and timeless. That allows them not to be attached to what they're releasing or attached to the story that has been programmed in. Does this make sense, what I'm saying? Okay. I'm going to move quickly on to the body then. So the head is looking after the intellect. The upper body, like the heart, the solar plexus, is responsible more for higher, we can call them higher feelings. These are more relationship-oriented feelings. And the lower body, like the stomach or the groin, is more action-oriented and driven by power feelings. Okay. Greed, sex, territory. Okay. This is where we get the emotions of anger and lust in the lower, and in the upper, we're going to get more empathy, compassion, love, unity, feelings of connection. Okay, so there are two even different levels of feeling and sensation. So we also want to look at when the person says, I think I'm angry, well, they're probably coming down from the lower body and the stomach, because we can borrow these emotions. They can migrate. So this is another way of creating coherence, is match the body center with the sensation and the energy and the emotion. Okay? The story belongs in the head. The story does not belong down in the stomach. The anger belongs in the stomach and not in the head. This is another way of creating that separation. How are you guys doing with this? Okay. So how much time do we have? So I wanted to talk about reconciling. Okay. This is talking about congruency. So in order to create congruency, you've got to understand how everything has its separate function, role, and place, okay? By the way, this is what we discuss at length in Module 2, using these body centers. And there's even centers beyond the body, like a higher awareness, we could call that spirit, or connection to the earth, where we can feel rooted, and through both ways we can start interconnecting with other human beings through the earth or through, if you want to call it universe. That moves into more spiritual realms. But this is where we also start connecting with other systems, morphogenic fields, things like that, okay? Reconciling the body with the mind, with the emotions, is if we start circulating a congruent energy throughout the body, it starts to become more coherent. The best way to do this is through resilience. So we can access a thought, an emotion, or a body center and start, okay, if we work with the heart. Well, in the heart, there might be a feeling of connection, and there might be thoughts of connection. If we just get all of that aligned together, then we can start saying, how is this affecting back to your own well-being? And this drops them more and more into a resilient state. The more we feed the well-being, the more they're using their frontal lobe, the less they're threatened, and they start creating more of a whole brain because they're aware of thoughts, feeling, and physicality. When we start circulating this up to the head, down to the feet, earth, sky, they start experiencing resilience, and what happens is their bubble opens even more, and the ego, or the protective measure, starts to disappear. This is where they could start entering more receptive states, okay? So what they'll enter then is more essential qualities, which are self-generating, self-perpetuating, they're unconditional. For example, unconditional peace, unconditional unity, unconditional creativity, or unconditional love. And the way to get them into this is through the enjoyment of a circulation of this energy. And this is what then is anchoring the resilience and the autonomy and the well-being. So now what can happen is there might be a conflict in the body, meaning my head won't accept this energy. It wants to fight it. Or my brain wants to dominate my heart. For example, I need to protect myself because I can't have an open heart. I don't trust this person, okay? Trust is more of a mental thing. And, or they might say, I have to protect myself. I can't be vulnerable. So if they want to open the heart, the stomach might start fighting and say, no, 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 you've got to protect, okay? So this is an example of, again, an incongruency just within the body, where the reptilian center and the frontal lobe are not connecting, and the body centers are fighting as well. Who's going to have control or dominance? So you can even do a mini loop just between body centers. For example, the client might be saying, I want to be more vulnerable, have an open heart, I want to feel unity. So we just get them to feel that. Just feel the warmth in the heart, feel the unity and the interconnection, and say, what's the strength there? How does that feed your well-being? Now allow that energy, warmth, well-being, strength, it must be known as a strength. Allow it to rise up to the head. How does the head receive that energy? It might reject it. So go back to the center and allow it to rise up again, and ask what happens when it reaches the head, or how does the head receive it? And by the second or third time, the client will say, oh, it's allowing it in. Great. What's your first sensation or experience? Or what are you aware of now? Oh, I feel more clear-headed, for example. Oh, great. And when you can just exercise the head, receiving the energy from the heart, and clear. Okay, now with a clear head, what's the strength that is now activated in the head? Oh, it could be focused awareness. It could be or clarity or a lightness. Great. What's it like to send that clarity and focus down to the heart? What does the heart feel? What is it receiving? When it receives clarity and focus, it experiences joy and generosity. Great. What's it like to have joy and generosity reach the head? And what you're facilitating here is a give and a receive between the two centers. You can imagine that this is upright between the two centers, because you can also do this in relationships. But I'm telling you, internally, you can start opening these centers to create more coherence. And then once they start having more coherence, they start to synchronize. And again, that's when we get into even more superconscious states, because the heart and the brain are now trusting each other, for example. I've done the same thing with the heart and the stomach. The stomach wants to protect. It will not let the heart open because it's afraid that it'll get hurt. But once the heart and the stomach recognize each other's strengths and realize how those strengths reinforce each other, it balances out. Any questions or comments on here?
I have a question. It was on the previous slide, actually. So you had resilience, autonomy, well-being. Can you please quickly redefine what autonomy, so basically autonomy from what, or autonomy of what?
It's basically sovereignty over myself, power over myself.
Okay.
When I have autonomy, I don't need to seek information or answers from somebody else, or to tell me. I don't need somebody to tell me who I am. I have more of an inner knowledge. I know who I am.
Okay.
Okay. Then that's not being defensive. Okay. This is being highly generous with myself. Okay. It's very self-accepting, and it's an inner strength. There's an inner strength, natural inner strength that goes with that, a natural inner conviction. Like when they say trust your gut, well, when you have autonomy, you do trust your gut. You live from the gut. You live from your own intuitions. You're listening to that first, and then you're resilient enough to question that as well and see if it still sticks. You're not threatened if you question yourself. Noticing we're getting to the end of time here. So how can I summarize this up? The main thing here is it doesn't matter where you start, okay? Normally when you're leading, consulting, healing, coaching, you're always starting with a story, with the individual. But we don't want to stay there, and we don't want to aggravate too much the thoughts, emotions, and body, because we might be aggravating some programming, right? What we want to really do more is drop down into how are they behaving and acting. Then we're going to get a clearer picture of what's going on emotionally, physically, and mentally, so we can start opening up essence as soon as possible, so we can start grounding them in resilience. That already starts to soften the program. Okay. Then they can learn about how they're in relationship to things, how they can start reconciling opposite truths. That way they also get into essence. And now they're in more of a plastic state, a state of neuroplasticity, where they can reprogram themselves from the ground up, not me programming them. They have resilience and autonomy to make the choice from their free will who they are. And it's not in reaction to their story or in reaction to those relationship games they play. Because here, story and game doesn't exist, so to speak. It's all contained, but it's all whole and holistic. There is no threat in source. Okay, it's a feeling of being at one with everything. And then we can start to build back into the individual. So you have many points of entry: story, game, thought, emotion, body. All of these are all entry points. Then we start seeing how do they line up. We line them up, bring in resilience, and then we can start reshaping ourselves. And when there's more congruency, there's more coherence. And when there's more coherence, there's more reconciliation. And this is ultimately what we do to liberate ourselves and our clients more naturally, more organically. And so as far as reconciling the brain with the body, with the emotions, that is what we mainly are learning and doing in all of the EED courses. And then that gets translated back into coaching and leadership and mediation skills. And our modules are coming up in Paris and Munich in March and April. The next webinar is going to talk about conflicts in relationships, the game level. We're going to break down the game level in more detail and show you how it's fractal in nature, where it's all repeating, recurring patterns. You'll all receive a thank you email with this information, as well as a special discount on our March and April courses if you're interested in attending. And we have our website. You can get more information there. We're also on Twitter, and you can always contact me with the email info@Essence Dynamics, or my personal email, Troy@Essence Dynamics. I know you probably have more questions and comments. I just love to hear basically what you're leaving with. And if any of you want to stay longer, you can stay a little bit with me. I can answer more questions after I've stopped the recording. But in general, what are you left with? Either insights or clarity, or new learnings? Or what did you enjoy?
If I may start, because I always also want to leave after that. I'm very thankful to have that I could participate in the webinar. I took the different layers. So when I do coaching, I really focus very, let's say, vague or generically. So what's going on? How do you feel? Or what? Maybe I don't say what do you feel, but very on one spot, you know. And now, like what you said, to really differentiate between these layers and maybe bring them, say, okay, that's in your brain, but what is going on in your emotional state? And so that's really very valuable, and I took a lot, but I have to digest, to be honest. I have to think and reflect on it afterwards.
Yeah, there is a lot to digest. I'm throwing a lot of theory or information at you. You can listen to the recording again and reflect on it more. But what this does, and we actively train you on you know, how to really differentiate, and that's part of your homework too. But once you can differentiate the layers and their function, this gives you more freedom as a coach, because you can now be more specific. Then you realize you have more options, and you have more artistry in your coaching, because you're more specific and intentional, which means you can be then more responsive and creative. So this is one way how EED really enhances the work you're already doing. You don't need to change your tools, but now you have more layers to work with your tools. Great.
Thank you. I appreciate a lot, Troy. It was really a pleasure.
It's a pleasure to have you. Anyone else with some final thoughts or comments?
Well, what this inspires me is so the title of the webinar is Reconciling Brain, Heart, and Body, and I've seen this before in even, you know, sometimes in articles that you see in magazines, and I was told it's a great concept and that it works, but it only works to a certain extent. And I was wondering what can create more harmony between all these, and you described it, and actually the secret is that there's not just these three ingredients. There's not just brain, heart, and body, but there's also essence behind that, and if you don't include the essence in there, then it will not work as well or not work at all.
That's right. That's one of the missing ingredients, is this acknowledgement of source level, the level beyond ego, identity, and personality and point of view. There is no ego or point of view. It's all points of view. It's all being in source. And when we have that connection, we have natural resilience and autonomy. Then it's like that's the roots of the tree. And then you build the tree trunk. That's the heart, body, and mind. And then from there, you have extended awareness, superconsciousness, and you can receive much more. So what we're really building is the human being as a conduit, okay, between essence and themselves, and even more essence. And what it actually creates, it's like this donut, this torsion field. So, and this image is the roots, the trunk, and the branches. And then that's where we're having a real fluid relationship with ourselves and others and with reality. And we can be more creative and resilient. So yeah, it's the essence that's missing in a lot of those articles and practices. Thank you for joining us, Christine. Were there any other questions relevant, or shall I stop the recording? And
well, I just want to acknowledge that there is much more clarity anytime I hear your training. And I was also recalling many of the situations that happened during coaching. And I find very important to separate the thoughts and the emotion. Sometimes I forgot it because I'm far beyond this.
Mm.
And
I just want to clarify on that, Irina. If we don't want to reinforce a programming, we need the
yes.
If we want to anchor and reinforce, we want them together. Okay. So
yes.
I'm saying that's, there's a time and a place to separate the emotion and the story. There's a time and place to put them together. Right. So, and continue, keep going.
Yeah, yes. Because I'm far beyond, sometimes I forget the first step and I go beyond. So, when during the coaching session, I also experienced that my own state of flow can influence my client and help them to get. This is the feedback that I always receive with my clients, is that each session they gain more clarity, alertness, stillness. This is very, very important for them. And there is a never-ending expanding our awareness. So thank you so much for recalling us, remind us.
Awesome.
Sorry for my voice.
Oh, that's okay. No, you're sounding loud and clear.
Thank you.
I hear you well. Great. Great. Well, thank you everyone for joining. I will stop the recording now, and if anyone has further questions, feel free to hang around. Our next webinar is on February 6th, the fractal nature of conflicts and relationships. Thank you all for joining.